I am not a vindictive person. It would be more accurate to say that I am for justice no matter what. I understand that our world is often not fair, but nothing prevents this justice from being restored, right? My wife was a real cheater, and you can say she retired from this activity, hoping that I would never find out anything. It wasn't like that. I am one half of the married couple Dirk and Gretchen Van Vliet. Both of us are 42 years old, tall, slim, with blonde hair and blue eyes, which is unsurprising given our Dutch heritage. I cannot speak for how our Indian and African American friends perceive us, but generally our Caucasian friends would likely consider us both an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of attractiveness. We have 3 children, 2 boys, Jurgen, spelled Jurgen in the Netherlands, who is 18, and Finn, who is 14, as well as a 16-year-old daughter, Tess. All of them share our tall, blonde, and blue-eyed traits. They are the sources of immense joy in my life, and I believe Gretchen feels the same. Our marriage has been, to put it simply, comfortable. We get along well, rarely argue, share similar political views, and have aligned ideas on parenting and discipline. We believe in setting and enforcing rules consistently, with exceptions made only for compelling reasons, and in providing our children with love, attention, and support without coddling them. I think this approach has been successful, as our children are well-adjusted, compassionate, yet determined and ambitious. Gretchen thrives as a successful commercial real estate agent, while I serve as the engineering manager overseeing quality control for a company that started as a startup when I joined, but has since grown into a large multinational corporation. Financially, we're stable, residing in a pleasant home located in a Northern Virginia suburb of Washington, D.C. Our intimate life, particularly mine with Gretchen, was comfortable. We maintained a satisfying frequency of what I deemed to be high-quality intimacy, averaging twice a week. This increased during vacations or when the children were away for an extended period. Unlike my previous experiences, our intimacy was characterized more by expressions of love rather than mere physical gratification. Before meeting Gretchen at the age of 22, I used to pursue romantic relationships quite actively. Our marriage came swiftly, just 18 months after our initial encounter. Prior to Gretchen, my longest relationship was with Gina Martinelli, which occurred when I was 20, and in the interim between my sophomore and junior years of college. Gina stands in stark contrast to Gretchen in many ways. She's a petite firecracker of Italian descent, weighing no more than 100 pounds. Physically, I tower over her by more than a foot, and her olive complexion sharply contrasts with my fair skin. At the time, Gina was a recently divorced 29-year-old with 2 young children. Her temperament was as volatile as Gretchen's, and mine are composed. Our meeting was rather unconventional. I accidentally collided with her car in a mall parking lot the day after my final exams. It's a wonder we ever connected considering the circumstances. Gina was understandably furious about the damage to her car, and if it weren't for her children's presence, she might have taken more drastic measures. However, by providing all my contact information, accompanying her to a repair shop, assuming responsibility for the repairs, and ensuring she and her children got home safely, I managed to defuse the situation. When I was driving her home, I found that I couldn't take my eyes off her. She noticed my gaze and smiled broadly. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how our bond deepened and led to subsequent events, but within 3 days of our car crashing, we were closely connected. And 2 weeks later, I moved into her modest summer house, telling my parents that I had found a better job elsewhere. Gina possessed not only charm, attractiveness, and street smarts, but also a fiery temperament. However, her most remarkable quality was passion. She had no equal in bed, she always craved more, nothing was forbidden. Our pleasure together was nothing short of seismic. Measured on the Richter scale, they would surely have reached 9.0. We engaged in intimacy at least once a day, often 3 times during all 3 months of the summer when I stayed with her. Even during her red days, when she was irritable but even more impatient, we made love without missing a second. Gina also came to my place for 4 weekends over the next 2 months while I was in college, leaving her children with their parents and younger sister, who were more than happy to babysit. It was a real passion. Neither Gina nor I saw our relationship as leading to marriage. It wasn't just the age difference or the fact that she had two children. Our characters didn't exactly match, and her cultural background was important to her and her family. Last weekend, she visited me at college on the Sunday evening before she left. She told me about meeting a rich, elderly man of Italian descent named Vince Aliotto, who was crazy about her and whom her parents approved of. While I was sad, Gina gave me an unforgettable experience an hour before her departure. Returning to the present moment, I must admit, there wasn't any specific reason for me to be in the lobby of the W Hotel in Washington on a Tuesday afternoon in May. However, a spontaneous request from a valued customer who was staying there before departing for Europe led me to that spot. You can imagine my astonishment when, while I was at the front desk, I witnessed Gretchen exiting the elevator, arm in arm with a man of similar height and age, with brown hair and brown eyes. Gretchen seemed entirely engrossed in her companion, oblivious to her surroundings. After discreetly arranging for the front desk to call my customer's room, I covertly observed Gretchen and her friend. Their parting kiss was extremely unpleasant to me. Despite my normally restrained demeanor, I felt a surge of rage, almost the same as Gina's. It took all my self-control, and fortunately the timely utterance of my client's name as he exited the elevator to keep from bumping into Gretchen's companion and then stalking her, perhaps even resorting to physical confrontation. My client inquired, "What's the matter, Dirk? You seem like you've seen a ghost." "Oh, apologies, Jack. I thought I spotted an old adversary from college, someone I never got even with, and it momentarily stirred up some intense feelings. But I soon realized it wasn't him, so I'll be back to my usual composed self in a moment," I explained, attempting a smile. Jack chuckled, and after some small talk, we proceeded into the coffee shop to discuss business. I managed to focus on Jack's concerns, but on my way back to the office an hour later, I found myself nearly involved in several accidents, still shaken by what I had witnessed. When I returned, I only had one business matter to attend to, allowing me some time for contemplation. I wasn't one to act impulsively, especially when dealing with something as significant as this, despite it being one of the most emotionally charged situations I could recall. By the time I left my office at 6:01 p.m. to pick up Tess from her high school tennis practice, I understood that I needed more time to figure things out. Hence, I decided to take a faux business trip. Tess's warm greeting, full of her usual bubbly charm, momentarily lifted my spirits, especially as she eagerly recounted the events of her day during our drive home. It also reminded me of the importance of maintaining daily contact with my children. I could never settle for being a father who only sees his kids on weekends. Given the suspicious glances Gretchen shot my way upon my return home, it's likely she sensed I was grappling with some issue. However, the lively dinner conversation with the kids seemed to alleviate her suspicions, affording me the opportunity to calm my frayed nerves. By bedtime, everything appeared normal. Fortunately, Gretchen didn't initiate intimacy that night, sparing me potential emotional turmoil. Upon reaching work Wednesday morning, I promptly phoned Gretchen to inform her of my sudden trip out of town. I assured her I'd swing by home for some essentials and would call her and the kids later. Wednesday and Thursday evenings were spent in one of our company-owned apartments in Arlington, Virginia, where I spoke with Gretchen and the kids for an hour each night. By midday Friday, the day of my supposed return, I had a plan. Although I engaged in some legitimate work activities from Wednesday to Friday, my primary focus was researching potential solutions to my predicament. This involved consulting family and tax attorneys, meeting with private investigators, the first of whom I found unsatisfactory, speaking with a psychologist, visiting a medical testing laboratory and a pharmacist with dubious ethics, meeting with an international banker, and extensive internet research covering a wide spectrum of topics. The main conclusion drawn was that I had to endure my marriage until our 14-year-old son, Finn, left for college. One aspect that somewhat eased the situation was Gretchen's newfound fondness for sherry, often indulging in a 3-O's. Cordial glass after dinner or before bed, especially on Fridays and Saturdays before retiring for the night. Over the next 4 years before Finn's departure for college, my primary objectives included saving money discreetly, obtaining a private investigator's report, conducting DNA tests on my children, prepaying their college tuition, collaborating with the disgraced pharmacist to develop a special compound, and meticulously preparing for an eventual divorce. This preparation even extended to persuading Gretchen to agree to file separate income tax returns starting from the next tax period, citing advice from tax counsel due to changing circumstances in my business. After clearing my mind of unpleasant thoughts, I managed to participate in relatively normal close-bed contacts with Gretchen over the next month. During this period, I was waiting for the report of a private investigator, the results of DNA analysis and clarification of the composition from the pharmacist. I deliberately delayed receiving this information for at least a month because I was afraid that once I received it, I would not be able to maintain the semblance of normality in my relationship with Gretchen, which I desperately needed. When it came to DNA testing, I was certain that the man I saw Gretchen with couldn't possibly be the father of any of my children. He had brown eyes and hair, was no taller than Gretchen, and none of my kids bore any resemblance to him. In truth, all 3 kids bore a striking resemblance to both Gretchen and me, so I didn't anticipate any negative results from the DNA test, but I felt the need to confirm it nonetheless. However, what I didn't want to discover was whether any of the kids were biologically mine, while others were not. Hence, I approached the DNA testing in an unconventional manner. I intentionally mixed up the labeling of the 3 vials containing the children's DNA swabs so that I wouldn't know which belonged to whom when I sent them to the lab. My own DNA sample was marked as .1. When I contacted the lab, I simply asked if the person in vial NR1 was related to those in the other 3 vials, and if so, what the likely relationship was. I made it clear that the lab should not identify the gender of the individuals in the unlabeled vials in their report. Luckily, this approach paid off. About a month later, just before I was due to receive the report, the head technician, Tom, called me. We were on a first-name basis by then. "Dirk, I have the DNA test results," he said. "Great, right on time. Give me the summary and any comments, Tom," I replied. Of course, we labeled the 3 unlabeled vials as A, B, and C for reference, as per your instructions. We did not record the genders of those individuals, as requested. Individuals corresponding to vials A and C are strongly biologically related to the person in vial NR1. Since we determined the gender of the person in vial SPR1, male, it is highly likely that he is the father of the individuals in vials A and C, Tom explained. At that moment, I swallowed nervously and tentatively inquired, "And what about vial B?" Well, although the individual represented by vial B shares a number of alleles with the individual in vial NR1 and has a biological connection to the individuals represented by vials A and C, there's no familial relationship between the individual in vial B and the one in vial model 1. While they may share similar hair and eye colors and some other identifiable traits, the person corresponding to vial B is not closely related to the person in vial model 1, Tom explained. What does closely related mean? I stuttered. It means that the person represented by vial B couldn't be a parent, grandparent, child, grandchild, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, or even a first cousin, and most likely not even a second cousin, of the person represented by vial NR1. Tom clarified. That brought some relief as my father, brother, and one cousin bore a strong resemblance to me. My final question, what's the likelihood that either of the parents of the individual linked to vial B had brown hair and brown eyes? I asked. Tom chuckled. The probability stands at around 1%. Thanks, Tom. I expect your report to be sent to my business address without any gender-specific details regarding the subjects in vials AC, I replied. You got it. Also, the cash you provided for the process is enough. In fact, we can refund $50, so I won't require anything further, Tom responded. Keep the $50 with my appreciation, I chuckled, though my mood was far from joyful. Now I was aware that one of my children wasn't biologically mine, but likely had a father with blonde hair and blue eyes. I intentionally remained unaware of which child it was because I wanted to ensure there was no possibility of treating any of them differently, unintentionally. Over the 14 years I've known them, I never suspected anything based on their appearance. so I wouldn't attempt to guess, nor could I have guessed correctly even if I had tried. The results also revealed that besides the man I saw Gretchen with, she had been involved in at least one other affair, with the biological father of one of my children. The DNA lab findings rendered some of the private investigators' information redundant in certain aspects, though not entirely in others. As anticipated, Judy James, the supervising PI overseeing my case, uncovered the specifics of Gretchen's current affair. Judy conducted herself with utmost professionalism, providing me with an oral briefing before furnishing the comprehensive dossier she had assembled. The individual in question is Winston Tangren. He's 41 years old, residing in New Jersey, married for 20 years with two 15-year-old fraternal twin daughters. He's employed in commercial real estate, which is where he crossed paths with your wife. Over the past month of surveillance, they've visited hotel rooms twice, one at the Hilton Hotel in Rockville, Maryland, and the other in Springfield, Virginia. On both occasions, they spent approximately 2 hours together in the room, recently showered upon exiting, displayed affectionate behavior, and exchanged passionate farewells. The Rockville encounter took place on a Tuesday between noon and 2 p.m., while the Springfield rendezvous occurred on a Wednesday between 2 and 4 p.m. They arrived and departed separately, Judy disclosed. "Have you managed to gather any intel on the duration of their affair?" I inquired. "We can't confirm that precisely. However, we do know they met almost precisely a year ago. And one informant, the only individual we've found who suspects an affair, speculates it's been about 6 months," Judy replied. I sadly nodded in agreement. "There's one aspect in our written report that, for reasons I can't delve into, is significantly understated," she said with a smile. "And if pressed to repeat this, I'll deny ever mentioning it." I listened intently as she elaborated. "In the report, we suggest that an operative may, albeit uncertain due to the illegality of obtaining phone records, have discovered that Gretchen possesses a second cell phone with the number 571-5555-6, which she uses to communicate with Tangren and possibly others. Again, I can't disclose why, but the may is a considerable understatement. That certainly caught my attention. I simply nodded in acknowledgement. I could provide more details, but all the information I have is documented in the dossier, and photos are included as well. "Anything else you need?" Judy asked. "No, that covers it. Do I owe anything beyond the retainer?" $308.40, she replied, handing me a bill. "You're quite precise, aren't you?" I chuckled as I handed her $300 bills and a 10. "Treat yourself to a cup of coffee with the extra $1.60. I smiled. "Thanks, generous tipper," she replied with a smile. The disgraced pharmacist was pleased to receive my task. I provided him with a false identity and utilized a disposable phone for communication, excluding our initial meeting and one subsequent to visiting the PI. The assignment entailed formulating a drug that could blend seamlessly into sherry, significantly enhance sexual arousal in the consumer, yet fade away entirely within 8 hours without any lasting negative consequences. Despite his dubious reputation, the pharmacist displayed remarkable expertise in chemistry, evident from his dedicated work on the project. "Mr. Sun, what progress have you made?" I inquired. "I've developed 4 potential compounds. You'll need to conduct experiments to determine the most effective one, and once you do, I'll produce more," he responded. "Excellent," I acknowledged. "Could you elaborate on each of them?" "The first compound, named alpha, is primarily derived from the mucuna bean. It boasts elevated levels of L-dopa, triggering dopamine production in the body. Such effects, but also acts as an aphrodisiac for women." I asked, "How should I administer it and how much?" Mr. Sun produced a small bottle with an eyedropper. "Just 2 drops, at most 3, he said, directly into the glass before pouring in the sherry. Give it a light stir with a metal stirrer and you're set. It should begin to take effect in about 30 minutes, reaching full effect within 45. The effects will last for a couple of hours." "All right," I acknowledged. "Anything else?" Mr. Sun proceeded to detail 3 other compounds, none of which seemed as promising as alpha, and all of which, despite his attempts to downplay them, carried potential side effects. He repeatedly assured me that Alpha had none. After his presentation, I settled my remaining debt with him in cash, and he informed me of the price for my next purchase of Alpha. I asked, how much Alpha would I need to last me 4.5 years? "A liter," he replied. "Will it degrade over time?" "Absolutely not. The ingredients and carrier are very stable. You should shake the container every week or so, but that's all." "If I buy a liter next time we meet, how much will that cost?" $5,000, he promptly replied. We shook hands and I departed. The effectiveness of the Alpha compound was so remarkable that I never bothered to try anything else. One Saturday evening, after we returned from a party, I offered Gretchen a glass of sherry, which she gladly accepted, adding 2 drops of Alpha to it. Pretending to drink sherry with her, I did the same. After we both showered separately and got ready for bed, Gretchen started paying attention to me. Our meeting turned into something more, devoid of tender affection, but rather rude and uninhibited. I bought a liter of Alpha from Mr. Sun, and 6 months after I introduced her to Gretchen, I noticed a significant change in her behavior in bed. She became more open to new experiments and was generally much more satisfied. During this crazy period, I discovered a secret mobile phone in her desk drawer during a visit. I discreetly installed a bug to track all her SMS and recorded messages on my work computer. Thanks to this, I found out about her dates with Angren, which took place about once every 2 weeks. On the nights leading up to her meetings with Tangron, I always gave her Alpha, ignoring any of her protests about participating in bed activities. About 3 months after I managed to find out the time of her meetings with Tangren, and I applied my keep going until she leaves strategy, she stopped communicating with him. I assumed that was the end of their romance. This did not change my plans for the future in any way, but after that she became even more active with me. For more than 4 years of what I considered cohabitation with someone with whom I communicated only physically, without any emotional connection, I stuck to my program. I convinced Gretchen to file separate tax returns for the past few years and prepay for our children's college tuition, despite temporary financial difficulties. I transferred bonuses and salary increases to an offshore bank account from which I paid taxes in the USA. I stashed more than $100,000 in cash and fabricated substantial gambling losses when I visited Las Vegas annually for a conference, transferring this money also to an offshore account. During this period, the idea of establishing the paternity of my 3 children never crossed my mind. I had great relationships with all of them, maybe even a closer connection with Tess than with the boys. Tess often came to me for advice on various issues, often preferring me to Gretchen, which seemed to bother Gretchen a little. On a Saturday, the day finally arrived for Finn to head off to college, about 4.5 years after I discovered Gretchen's affair and learned that one of my children had a different biological father. We rented the largest SUV available, kept only 3 seats, and loaded up his belongings for the journey to college. I promised him his own car in his junior year, if he maintained a B+ average or better during his sophomore year, the same deal I had made with Jurgen and Tess, both of whom had upheld their end of the bargain. Finn was enrolled at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which was roughly a 2.5-hour drive from our home in Northern Virginia. James Madison boasted an excellent business management school which aligned with Finn's interests. The night before we left, I made sure that Gretchen and I had our last night together. The next morning, I knew perfectly well that this would be the last time we would be close. We dropped Finn off at his dorm around 5 p.m., eager for us to leave as he had already caught the attention of 2 attractive girls in the opposite dorm room. Our destination was Northern Virginia. I made a phone call to ensure that all the belongings I wanted from our house, which I hadn't already discreetly taken over the past 2 weeks, were now in my new condo, just 2 blocks away from my office. I texted the process server to confirm our meeting at the first Woodstock exit on Route 81 within 45 minutes. When we exited, ostensibly for gas and a restroom break, I scanned the area for the process server while Gretchen went to the ladies' room. To my surprise, the process server was already there, having sent a text with his location just 20 meters away. We made eye contact, and I gestured toward Gretchen as she entered the travel center. He acknowledged with a nod, and I returned to the SUV and drove off. At the next exit, I stopped for gas and a bathroom break, ignoring the repeated calls from Gretchen's distinct ringtone. Finally, I headed straight to my condo and enjoyed a restful night's sleep on both Saturday and Sunday. To describe Gretchen as angry would be an understatement. I anticipated needing to speak with her at some point, so when she phoned my office on Monday morning, I picked up. She launched into a tirade, screaming at me. I ended the call abruptly. She called back, but before she could speak, I interjected loudly, "If you raise your voice, I'll hang up. If you can control your anger, we can arrange to meet." Though clearly still upset, she refrained from shouting. "You're despicable, leaving me stranded 90 miles from home and serving me divorce papers through a process server. What's wrong with you?" she exclaimed. "My issue is with a wife who betrayed me. I can arrange to meet you tomorrow to discuss it further if you'd like," I replied calmly. She seemed momentarily taken aback. "I never—" she began to protest. I halted her, saying, "Gretchen, stop deceiving me as you have been for the past 19 years at least. Let's discuss this tomorrow. I propose meeting at the conference room in your office at 6 p.m. She questioned, "What's wrong with our house?" "You mean your house? Apologies, but that place holds unpleasant memories for me, living with a cheating partner and all. If we're talking, it'll be at your office's conference room. Just text me the details." "Bye. Can't wait," I sarcastically concluded before ending the call. Exactly at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, I entered conference room B in Gretchen's office. A suited man sat beside her. Before saying anything else, I glanced at him and demanded, "Who the hell are you and why are you here?" "Can we begin without profanity?" Gretchen requested. "Sure, once you explain who the hell this guy is and why he's here." "My name is Dr. John Bellows, and I'm a marriage counselor. Gretchen asked me to join our discussion," he stated, rising and extending his hand, which I declined to shake. "Fine, Dr. Bellows, marriage counselor. If Gretchen wants you here, that's okay with me, provided you sign a confidentiality agreement," I responded as I took a seat across from him and Gretchen. "That's not necessary. It goes against the ethics of my profession," he began before I cut him off. "Sorry, but either you sign the agreement, leave, or I leave," I snapped. "But I don't have—" he started before I interrupted once more. "In my line of work, I frequently handle confidentiality agreements. In fact, I always carry 2 versions in my briefcase along with various other forms," I remarked nonchalantly. "No problem." I pulled out one of our standard confidentiality agreements, made some quick revisions with a pen to tailor it to our needs, and handed it over. "Take a look at this. Once you sign and date it, Gretchen and I will do the same. Then we'll ask my soon-to-be ex to make copies for each of us." I noticed Gretchen was visibly irritated, but keeping her composure as both she and Bellows reviewed the document. "Doesn't seem too burdensome," Bellows commented as he signed it and passed it to Gretchen, who also signed. I followed suit. Gretchen made copies for herself and Bellows before returning the original to me. "Thanks," I said, placing the document back in my briefcase. "Now, what did you want to discuss, Gretchen? I thought everything was spelled out clearly in the divorce papers you were served." "Firstly, I expect an apology for calling me a cheating slut over the phone," she retorted, arms folded. "When I said okay, I apologize." I caught her off guard. "Even though you've been unfaithful and might even fit the definition of a promiscuous person, there was no excuse for my choice of words towards you. In the future, if I need to refer to you indirectly, I'll use the term unfaithful spouse." How does that sound? Both Bellows and Gretchen gave me some flack, which I handled politely. Then Gretchen asked, "If you suspect me of infidelity, why didn't you file for adultery?" "The first reason is that I continued to live with you for more than 4 years after the known adultery, which means a Virginia court won't grant a divorce on that basis. There might be a more recent affair I'm unaware of, but I'd rather not change the grounds for divorce due to the second reason. The second reason is that I don't want our family and friends, especially Jurgen, Tess, and Finn, to be exposed to information about your affairs." "Did you rush into filing, though? You haven't met Virginia's standard for a no-fault divorce," Bellows interjected. Technically, yes, Bellows, but my lawyer assures me that by stating I established a separate residence as of the filing date, which was Saturday, the court will overlook that technicality, I replied. What evidence do you have for your accusation of infidelity? Bellows then asked, indicating they preferred him to do the questioning. I took out an envelope from my briefcase containing photographs of Tangren and Gretchen kissing passionately, pictures of them leaving hotel rooms, text messaging, and a summary of the private investigator's findings. Casually, while they were looking through the contents, I noticed, "Oh, by the way, Gretchen, just so you don't get caught off guard, the full copy of what I just gave you was personally delivered to Melissa Tangren today." Gretchen gave me a look that was a mixture of surprise and anger, before returning her attention to the evidence. The materials in my envelope had noticeably deflated the Bellows, but he continued to insist. "It is obvious that you have forgiven Gretchen. Given that you have lived with her for more than 4 years, she has not seen Tangren for more than 3, and you, as Gretchen described it, have become closer to her during this time." "That's where you're wrong, Doc," I replied with a grin. "I haven't had a love relationship with her since I witnessed her kissing and fooling around with Tangren at the W Hotel in Washington over 4 years ago." This revelation caused a shocked expression and furrowed brows on Gretchen's face. I added enthusiastically, "Since then, I have been in a relationship with someone else solely for the sake of physical pleasure. I never made love to her again." Upon hearing this, Gretchen began to cry, got up from her seat, and left the room. Bellows asked for a moment, urging me not to leave before hurrying after her. I waited for an additional 15 minutes, ready to leave, when they returned to the room. Gretchen's eyes were swollen, though she had stopped crying. Once she sat down, she managed to say, "I've loved you throughout our marriage. Why can't you forgive me? Tangren was a terrible mistake, and I swear I'll never be involved with anyone else again. The problem is, there's at least one other affair I know of, which happened around 19 years ago. I don't know when it began or ended, but that's the one that truly bothers me," I said angrily. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Gretchen sniffled. As I entered the meeting, I hadn't planned on revealing that I knew one of our children wasn't mine. Perhaps she didn't even know, despite her infidelity. But seeing the look in her eyes made me realize things could turn ugly and costly unless she understood my deep disgust for her. Suddenly, an idea struck me. "All right, here's the deal. We'll amend our confidentiality agreement. If you, Gretchen, ever disclose what I'm about to tell you, with Bellows as our witness, bound by confidentiality as well, you'll owe me $1 million. Agreed?" She and Bellows exchanged whispers for a moment. "Okay," she finally said. I retrieved the original agreement and inserted an additional paragraph. Both Gretchen and Bellows signed and dated beneath the added paragraph, as did I. Gretchen made copies for herself and Bellows, returning the original document to me. "All right, spill the beans," Gretchen demanded, arms folded across her chest. "Simply put, one of Jürgen, Tess, and Finn is not biologically related to me. I've deliberately chosen not to know which one to prevent any subconscious bias in how I treat them. But I am certain of this fact," I explained solemnly. Gretchen was stunned into silence, visibly taken aback. Unless she was an exceptional actress, she was genuinely surprised about the parentage of one of our children. Bellows had to speak for her. "How can you be sure?" Bellows inquired. "Through DNA testing," I replied, handing them another folder from my briefcase. "You may examine this for the next 15 minutes, but you may not make any copies, and I will not provide you with one either." I further explained that I structured the test so that I remained unaware of which vials corresponded to each child. As Gretchen and Bellows reviewed the report, Gretchen grew increasingly despondent. After about 10 minutes, they had finished reading. I retrieved the DNA file, shut my briefcase, and explained, "Gretchen, you now understand why reconciliation is futile, why I left you in Woodstock out of sheer frustration, and why you must sign the separation agreement attached to the divorce papers to end our marriage pretense in a year." As I departed, Gretchen was sobbing, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at Bellows or me. "Our marriage wasn't a pretense," she murmured. I closed the door and heard nothing more. Gretchen, feeling defeated, reluctantly signed the papers, but this was just the beginning. Despite my efforts to remain positive, our children were upset. I assured them that Gretchen and I would maintain a friendly relationship and even celebrate holidays together. About 2 months later, I had an unexpected encounter with Winston Tangren. Clearly intoxicated, he barged into my office, ignoring my secretary's objections. He accused me of ruining his life by sending something to his wife and talking to Melissa on the phone. Seizing the moment, I responded by physically confronting him. I delivered one punch and one kick, ensuring my response was proportionate. Due to the significant physical advantage I had over him, Winston suffered serious injuries. Fortunately, with my secretary's statement, security footage, and a doctor's assessment confirming the limited extent of the altercation, I faced no legal consequences. Gretchen was unaware that her family had attempted an intervention with me, even offering to mediate. Despite my good relationship with Gretchen's father, Hans, who was a proud Dutchman, I was surprised he agreed to the intervention. It seemed Lotta and Julia were determined to salvage the marriage, leaving Hans with little choice but to participate. To my surprise, Julia's husband, Stan, also attended, though they did give me the courtesy of a prior call before arriving at my condo. I welcomed them politely, offering beverages and cookies. I'd always held a favorable opinion of Hans, Lotta, and Julia, but not so much Stan, and saw no reason to be impolite unless things escalated. The conversation unfolded predictably. Despite attempts to maintain cordiality, tears were shed by Lotta and Julia, while Hans expressed his displeasure respectfully. At that moment, I had no idea about the biological father of one of my children. Considering their features, I couldn't pinpoint anyone from our past as a likely suspect. However, when Stan made a rude comment and wore a snarky expression, a realization suddenly dawned on me. Stan and Julia resided within a 20-mile radius of us approximately a year before Jürgen was born, until shortly before Finn's arrival, at which point they relocated hundreds of miles away. During that period, Gretchen's relationship with Julia was intricate and competitive, though it became less complex and devoid of competition after Stan and Julia's departure. Despite this, Gretchen appeared unfazed by Stan, much like myself. I never observed any affectionate gestures, meaningful glances, or between them. However, given what I now know about Gretchen, it's conceivable that she may have engaged with Stan in a competitive bid to outdo her sister. Back when Stan and Julia lived nearby, Stan had a different appearance. He had blonde hair, stood only 2 inches shorter than me, and had blue eyes. Despite later becoming overweight and hunched with prematurely graying hair, at that time, he wasn't unattractive. While his features lacked the refinement of Gretchen's or mine, he was reasonably good-looking and a competent athlete. For a moment, my mind wandered as that thought raced through my head. But I regained focus and continued to show even more kindness to Lotta, Julia, and Hans. By the time they left, nearly 2 hours later, they understood that there was no chance of Gretchen and I reconciling, but I assured them that I would always cherish our relationship, excluding Stan, stay in touch, and hoped we could still celebrate birthdays and holidays together as we had in the past. I wasn't entirely truthful when I said I harbored no ill will towards Gretchen. I didn't bring up her infidelities as the cause of the breakup, and I know she didn't either. It's simply that the spark had faded, and I felt too young to live without love. In our final negotiation before the divorce was finalized, Gretchen and I had one remaining contentious issue. Although it mattered more to her than to me, I felt I had already been quite accommodating. Eventually, I proposed a deal to settle the matter. If she honestly answered one question, I would concede the point to her, and we could move on. She agreed, so we dismissed our attorneys. I then asked her, "Gretchen, have you ever been involved romantically with your brother-in-law, Stan?" Judging from her expression and body language, I was certain the answer was yes, so I didn't pay much attention to her actual response. I believe she denied it vehemently, but regardless of what she said, I was satisfied. I thanked her for her answer, apologized for the question, instructed the attorneys to concede the point to Gretchen, and even invited her to lunch. I extended the lunch invitation knowing she had a building showing soon after, but I wanted to reassure her that I accepted her verbal denial. She politely declined, saying, "Maybe some other time," to which I insincerely replied, "Sure, consider it a rain check." I was sure Stan would pay off the debt, but I didn't want Julia to suffer. Therefore, my revenge had to be physical, not emotional or financial. About a year later, a great opportunity arose when I found out that Stan was the biological father of one of my children. Finn informed me that Stan was planning to go fishing near the conference, which I could very well attend. Taking my most trusted accomplice, we disguised ourselves, rented a car, and I drove alone to Stan's camp. Under the cover of night, I subdued Stan, taped his mouth shut, and attacked him without warning his comrades. I inflicted serious injuries on him and exposed him to fire ants while whispering, "You shouldn't have betrayed married women." I left without a trace, without arousing suspicion. Stan recognized me in subsequent meetings, but never mentioned what happened to him. 3 years after my divorce was finalized, things had progressed as well as could be expected. Gretchen, her family, and mine had shared moments like attending Jürgen's and Tess's college graduations together, being pleasant and congenial at Jürgen's wedding, and throwing a big celebration for Tess's 21st birthday. Gretchen had also kept quiet about the DNA situation concerning our children. Having also settled the scores with both Winston and Stan, and with no realistic chance of discovering any further affairs Gretchen might have had, I was content, except for one thing. I hadn't truly found a replacement for Gretchen. Though I had dated quite a bit and even had some casual encounters, none of them matched the fulfilling sexual experiences I had with Gina, or with Gretchen after I started spiking her sherry with Alpha. Nor did I experience the same level of intimacy that Gretchen and I shared before I learned about her affairs. Then, by chance, something unexpected happened. While attending a local trade show, I noticed a woman in one of the booths who bore a striking resemblance to Gina Martinelli. Intrigued as the day was winding down, I approached her and said, "I hope I'm not being rude, but you remind me of someone I once knew, Gina Martinelli." She did a double take. "That's my sister, although she hasn't gone by Gina Martinelli for quite some time. She's Gina Aliotto now." "Wait, are you her younger sister who used to babysit for her during the summers before she met Vince Aliotto?" She grinned. "It's me." "Are you the tall Dutchman she lived with one summer, the one she always bragged about her bed exploits?" I didn't know what bragging was before, but it certainly raised my morale. "I'm still the same," I grinned. "Dirk Van Vliet. And you?" "I'm Gabriella. I returned to Martinelli after the divorce 4 years ago," she said, beaming. The memories of my time with Gina came flooding back to me instantly. I remembered her sister, who looked like her, and was in high school then. Gabriella must be about 46 or 47 years old now, although she didn't look more than 35. "I've been divorced for 3 years now. How about dinner tomorrow to catch up?" I asked. "Not today," she replied with a smile. "But I'm local. I live in Arlington. Tomorrow night is coming up, and then I'll definitely be hungry." Gabriella possessed most of her sister's irresistible charm, but with less fickleness. We got along great. Since her children were not in college and there were currently no romantic connections, by our 3rd date I was determined to become that romantic interest. 2 days after our 4th date, during which we were already in bed. Although our bodies at 50 and 47 couldn't match the energy of our younger selves, it was still very cool. I will move on.